It was a hot day in Phoenix, Arizona. The kind of heat that presses down on you even inside. A storage unit was being cleaned out. This happens sometimes. People rent them. Then they stop paying. The unit gets sold, or the contents get cleared. That is what was happening this one day in July 1993. Workers were going through the unit. They found a big appliance. It was a refrigerator. No, it was old. It was unplugged. You can imagine the smell. This was not a good smell. It was a terrible smell. The workers opened the refrigerator, and that is when they found her. A body. A human body. Inside the old refrigerator. This was not normal. This was not something you see every day. This was a crime scene. Immediately, the police were called. The police came fast. The scene was grim. The woman inside was clearly dead. She had been there a while. Maybe a very long while. Her body was wrapped. It was covered in some things. The refrigerator had been sealed. It was meant to keep her hidden. Someone did not want her found. Or at least they did not want her found easily. The investigators started their work. This was the start of a long journey. A journey that would take decades. The first step was just figuring out who she was. They needed a name. Every person has a name. This woman did not have one. Not yet. She was just a Jane Doe. The woman in the refrigerator. They took her from the storage unit. The medical examiner started their process. They needed to find out how she died. And when. And anything else they could. They looked for clues on her body. They looked for distinguishing marks, scars, tattoos, anything unique. But there was not much. Her body was badly decomposed. Time had done its work. They tried to get fingerprints, but that was hard. The skin was not good. They did their best. They hoped for a match. They ran her prints through databases. Nothing came back, no criminal record, no past identification from other sources. She was not in their system. They tried to get dental records. This also needed a match. You need to know who you are looking for. You need a dentist who took x-rays. But then you need to compare them. But again, there was no name. So, they put her dental chart into a national database for unidentified people. Yes, they waited. They tried to figure out her age. She looked like she was in her 40s or 50s. They tried to figure out her race. Maybe white, maybe Hispanic. It was hard to tell for sure. Or her height, her weight. All the basic things. All of them were just estimates. They looked at the clothes she was wearing. What kind of clothes were they? Were they old? Were they new? Did they give any clues about where she came from? Or what she did? They were just simple clothes. Nothing special. Nothing that screamed, this person worked here or this person lived there. The refrigerator itself was a clue. Where did it come from? Who owned the storage unit? The police looked at the rental records. They talked to the owner of the storage facility. They found the name of the last person who rented the unit. That person was questioned, but it did not lead to her name. It did not lead to answers about who she was. The police canvassed the area. They talked to people. Did anyone see anything? Did anyone know someone missing? Did anyone recognize the woman from a description? They put out a bulletin. They put her face out there. A facial reconstruction was done. They tried to show what she might have looked like when she was alive. They hoped someone would see it. They hoped someone would say, that's my sister, that's my mother, that's my friend. But no one did. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. The leads dried up. The initial push of the investigation slowed down. There was no progress. The woman in the refrigerator remained a Jane Doe. Her file went onto a shelf. It became a cold case, one of many. This is a sad thing, to be a Jane Doe. It means you existed, you lived, you had a life, you had people who cared about you. But when you die, your identity is lost. Your name is lost. And with your name, a part of your story is lost too. Your family does not know what happened to you. They do not know where you are. They do not know to grieve. They just wonder. For years, for decades. And that is what happened to the woman in the refrigerator. She was forgotten by the public, but she was not forgotten by everyone. There are always people in law enforcement who remember, who care about these unsolved cases, who keep a small piece of hope alive. The years passed. The 1990s gave way to the 2000s, then the 2010s. Forensic science changed a lot during these years. New technologies came along. Things that were just dreams in 1993 became possible. One of these big changes was DNA. DNA was around in 1993, but it was not as powerful. It was not as refined, and most importantly, it was not used in the same way. Back then, DNA was good for comparing a suspect to a crime scene, or for excluding someone, but it was not good for finding distant relatives. It was not good for building family trees. But then, things started to change. Around the mid-2010s, a new method became big. It was called genetic genealogy. This was different. This used the same kind of DNA tests that people use for fun. The ones where you send in your spit, and it tells you where your ancestors came from, or it finds your cousins. Law enforcement realized this could be a game changer. If you could find a distant cousin of a Jane Doe, you could start to build a family tree. You could work backward in time. You could find common ancestors, then you could work forward again. You could try to find missing branches, and maybe, just maybe, you could find the Jane Doe. This was a long and difficult process. It was not a quick fix. It took a lot of time. It took a lot of expertise. You needed people who understood genetics. You needed people who understood genealogy. And you needed good old-fashioned detective work. By the late 2010s, more and more cold cases were being solved this way. So Jane Does and John Does were finally getting their names back. Homicide cases that were decades old were getting solved. It was a new era for cold case investigations. The Phoenix Police Department, like many others, started to look at their old Jane Doe cases again. They thought about the woman in the refrigerator. Could this new science help her? They hoped it could. They sent a small sample of her remains. This was very precious. They sent it to a lab. This lab specialized in extracting DNA from old, difficult samples. It was not easy work. The DNA could be degraded, it could be contaminated, but they were good at it. The lab worked its magic. They got enough DNA. They got a DNA profile. Then, they uploaded this profile to public DNA databases. These were the same databases that regular people used, people who wanted to find out about their family history. And then the waiting began. But this time, the waiting was different. There was a new kind of hope. A match came back. It was not a direct match. It was not a mother or father. It was a distant cousin, maybe a second cousin, maybe a third. This was enough. This was a starting point. The genetic genealogist took over. These were often volunteers, or people working for specialized companies. They started building a family tree. They took the distant cousin, they looked at their family, they looked at their parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents. They tried to find the common ancestor, the person from whom both the Jane Doe and the distant cousin descended. This was like putting together a giant puzzle. Many pieces, many names, many dates. They used birth records, marriage records, or death records, census records, newspaper archives, old obituaries. They spent hours and hours, their days and weeks. They built out the tree. They went back generations, sometimes to the 1800s. Once they found the common ancestor, they started working forward again. They looked at all the descendants of that common ancestor. They tried to find a branch of the family that was missing someone who might have gone to Phoenix. Someone who matched the general description of the Jane Doe, her estimated age, her estimated time of death. It was painstaking work. They followed many different lines, many different possibilities. They eliminated people, they confirmed others. They built a list of potential candidates, people who could be the woman in the refrigerator. And then they got closer, they narrowed it down, they found a specific branch of the family, a family that had a missing person, a woman who had simply vanished decades ago. Her name was Wanda Jean Neill Kirkendall. This was her name, a name that had been silent for so long. The investigators contacted Wanda's family. This was a big moment. It was a call no family wants to get, but also a call many families long for. The police explained what they had found. They explained the DNA. They explained the connection. The family was asked for more DNA. This was to confirm the match. It was usually a close relative, a child, a sibling, a parent, someone whose DNA would be a very strong match. They wanted to be absolutely sure, and they were. The DNA came back. It was a match, a definitive match. The woman found in the refrigerator in 1993 was Wanda Jean Neill Kirkendall. After 29 years, after almost 3 decades, she finally had her name back. This was a moment of profound relief for her family, but also a moment of deep sadness. They had wondered for so long, they had worried, they had hoped. Now they knew. Their Wanda was gone, and she had been gone for a very long time. So, who was Wanda Jean Neill Kirkendall? She was born in 1948. She was from Illinois. She lived a life. She had a family. She had connections. She grew up in Illinois. She went to school there. She had siblings. She had parents. She experienced childhood. She made friends. She had dreams. As she grew older, she got married. She had children. And she was a mother. She had responsibilities. She had a home. Life can be complicated. For some people, it is a straightforward path. For others, it takes twists and turns. Wanda's path eventually led her to Phoenix. What brought her there? Maybe a new start. Maybe a job, maybe family. It is not always clear why someone moves across the country. But she ended up in Arizona. Her family had lost touch with her. This happens sometimes. People drift apart. They move. They do not have cell phones or email in the same way they do now. Letters get lost. Phone numbers change. A person can become hard to find. They might not realize how hard they are to find. Or they might not want to be found. Wanda had been missing for a long time before her body was found. Years. Her family had tried to find her. They had reported her missing. But it was a different time. The information available was less. The systems were not as interconnected. She just vanished. And then her body was found in that refrigerator. The mystery of her identity was a deep one. But now, thanks to science and persistent people, a big part of that mystery was solved. But identifying her was just one part of the story. It was a huge part. It brought her name back. But it did not answer everything. The next question, the big question, remained. How did Wanda die? The police were back on the case. It was no longer the case of a Jane Doe. It was the case of Wanda Jean Neill Kirkendall. And now, they had a name. They had family. They had a history. This gave them new avenues to explore. They talked to her family again. Now that they knew it was Wanda, the family could provide more details. They could tell the police about her life, about her last known contacts, about anyone she might have been with, about any problems she might have had. But it had been decades. Memories fade, people move. Some people might have died. It was still a very hard investigation. The crime scene from 1993 was old. It was not easy to revisit. The clues were few. The refrigerator itself was evidence. But what could it tell them now, after so long? The police looked at who rented the storage unit. They revisited that person. Now, with Wanda's name, did that person know her? Like, was there a connection? They looked at, like, old associates, old friends. Anyone who might have known Wanda in Phoenix, they were looking for answers. Was she murdered? Was it an accident? Was there a person responsible for putting her body in that refrigerator? And if so, who? This is the hardest part of these cases. Bringing a name back is powerful. It gives dignity. It gives closure to the family about who she was, but the questions about her death can still hang heavy. The Phoenix Police Department continued to work on this case. They still wanted to know what happened to Wanda. They wanted to give her family full closure. Not just a name, but the truth about her final moments. This case is a real example of why identifying Jane matters. Every single unidentified person represents a life unremembered in an official capacity. It means a family somewhere is wondering. It means a piece of someone's history is missing. And the technology of genetic genealogy is changing this. It is bringing names back to thousands of people who are only numbered. It is bringing peace to families who had only questions. It is showing that even after decades, it is never too late to try and find answers. Wanda Jean Neill Kirkendall was the woman in the refrigerator. She was not just a grim discovery. She was a person. She was a daughter, a sister, a wife, a mother. And now, after 29 long years, her name is known. Her story, though still incomplete, has a beginning and an end to her anonymity. The search for justice for Wanda continues, but her name will not be forgotten again. That is a small comfort, but an important one. It shows that every life has value, and every person deserves to be remembered by their name.